Greetings friends and welcome to my time-lapse build of the Tamiya 1/35th scale Panther Ausf G early production. I began the build by attaching the suspension arms to the lower hull with Tamiya limonene cement. This is a non-toxic version of the regular Tamiya cement, which is much safer to use as it doesn't give off any harmful toluene and acetone fumes. The glue takes twice as long to dry, but this doesn't bother me as the bond is just as strong. Then I attached the differential cover and rear plate, again with Tamiya limonene cement, which also fit nicely with no major issues. Before attaching the exhaust pipes, I gave them a rough texture by covering it with cement, and after the plastic had softened up, I dabbed a sponge onto the surface to give it a rough texture. The rear stowage bins and tow hooks were then attached as well. After that, I attached the driver and bow gunner's hatches, as well as the radiator cover. This would have been a lot easier had I not run out of Mr. Cement S. The machine gun bulge was then attached, and I recreated the cast steel texture with the same method I used on the exhaust pipes. The engine hatch and various other parts for the engine deck were then attached using Tamiya limonene cement. Now that the assembly of the hull was complete, I began assembling the turret. The first part to be assembled was the gun breech, which went together very nicely and was quite nicely detailed. After attaching it to the front of the turret, I assembled the turret itself. Once that was done, I cemented the two halves of the gun barrel together, which was very nicely detailed. My only complaint was that since the gun came in two halves, it resulted in a very prominent joint seam, which required a lot of sanding in order to eliminate it. Prior to this, I also gave the gun mantlet a rough texture to simulate the cast steel. The turret was now complete, So I went on to assembling the running gear. The idler wheel came in several parts which fit together nicely, and the polycap inside it allows it to rotate once attached to the hull. The drive sprocket was also very nicely molded, and the polycap inside also allows it to rotate, which will be very important when attaching the tracks later on. I didn't record the painting of the road wheels because that would be quite boring, and here I'm assembling them with Tamiya limonene cement, of course after painting them. They have very nicely molded bolts and other details, which make them look very realistic, which is a very nice touch. After ruining my Panzer IV with a green tinted Vallejo Dunkelgelb, I bought some flat yellow to help correct the color shade. I mixed 8 parts yellow to 2 parts Vallejo Dunkelgelb and painted 5 coats onto the model with a flat brush. Due to some computer problems, I couldn't record the painting of the Rotbraun and Dunkelgrün, so here are some pictures. Before decaling, I realized that the color was way too yellowish, and made the tank look a little goofy, so I bought some MIG acrylic Dunkelgelb Mid-War, or AMIG 010, which had the perfect shade which I was looking for. Once again, because of some computer problems, I couldn't record most of the weathering. I began by adding pigments of various colors to simulate dirt building up on the lower hull. After that, I found the table underneath the model became showered with brown dust whenever I moved it, so I used Mr. Markstetter as a pigment fixer. After that, they were fixed permanently and securely. Then I gave the model a coat of Vallejo gloss varnish and applied the decals. After letting them dry for 24 hours, I covered the model in a black sludge wash to highlight the details and gave it a slightly weathered look. Once the wash had dried, I coated the model in 3 coats of Vallejo matte varnish, then applied a thick layer of a European earth wash to make it look dirty. I then simulated streaking grime by mixing burnt umber pigments with some water and dish soap. The dish soap is used to help it stick to the model better. I applied a thick mixture of this onto the upper vertices, and then after letting it dry, I dragged a damp brush down to create the streaking effects. After this, the weathering of the hull and turret was complete, and now I could move on to weathering the tracks, which is probably the most fun part. I first coated the tracks in Vallejo Model Wash, which was to act as a fixer. After that, I dabbed on some burnt umber pigments. And after going over the whole length of the track, I added some orange chalk powder to random areas to simulate rust. I found that touching the brush directly onto the track added way too much powder, so I held the brush above the track and tapped it with my finger to allow the powder to sprinkle onto the tracks. After that, I blended the rust into the tracks with a large brush, and I think it looks pretty good. After sealing the pigments again with Mr. Mark Setter off camera, I repeated the same technique on the inner side of the tracks, again using Mr. Mark Setter as a seal-in and fixer. I then attached the tracks to the model using super glue and recreated the sag on the top run of the tracks by super gluing them to the upper end of the road wheels. After that, I improved the detail by making a radio antenna out of stretch screw and engine grills made from mesh cut from a cake strainer. I also added some gloss varnish to the commander's cupola to simulate glass, and with that the model was complete. Overall, I really enjoyed this kit. In typical Tamiya fashion, all of the parts are molded and fit together beautifully, and the construction was simple yet very well detailed. You may notice that the camo scheme I painted is completely different to the one in the instructions. That's because I thought the ones included looked kinda lame. So I took the camo scheme from Tamiya's 148th Panther, which in my opinion looks much better. My only complaints about this kit are the lack of photo etch engine grills included in the box, as well as a two-piece gun barrel which required a lot of sanding to get rid of the prominent joint seam. I'd recommend this kit to both beginners and advanced modelers because it's quite simple enough that beginners wouldn't have a hard time building it, yet has enough detail to keep you advanced guys happy. Thanks for watching everyone, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future builds and other videos.